What do we learn about the character of Boaz through his interaction with Ruth in Ruth 2? This is the question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Ruth on Walking Through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing Ruth 2 verses 8 to 13, but before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to Ruth 2 verse 8, but if you don't have a Bible, don't worry, just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Ruth chapter 2, beginning at verse 8. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "You will listen, my daughter, will you not? Do not go to glean in another field, nor go from here, but stay close by my young women. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Have I not commanded the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn." So she fell on her face, bowed down to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" And Boaz answered and said to her, "It has been fully reported to me all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and how you have left your father and your mother and the land of your birth, and have come to a people whom you did not know before. The Lord repay your work, and a full reward be given you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge." Then she said, "Let me find favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me, and have spoken kindly to your maidservant, though I am not like one of your maidservants." In our last lesson, we had Ruth gaining permission from Naomi to go and glean in the fields for food. Gleaning was when you gathered the leftovers of the harvest that was not originally harvested. Under the law of Moses, this was commanded of Israel as a way of providing for the poor. Since Ruth and Naomi were poor in that they had no money, this is how they would be fed upon their return to Israel. Ruth eventually came to the fields of Boaz, a wealthy man around Bethlehem, due to his fields. Ruth gleaned in those fields, something that caught the eye of Boaz, who inquired as to who she was. The servant who was in charge of the reapers told Boaz that the woman was Ruth, a young Moabite woman who had come back with Naomi. Even from today's reading, we learn there must have been more to this conversation than is recorded, for Boaz actually knows a lot more about Ruth when he talks to her. With Ruth being identified as a Moabite, this could have angered Boaz and got him to cast her out due to hatred of foreigners, but that is not how Boaz acted. Instead, according to verse 8, he called out to Ruth in order to talk to her. He refers to her as daughter, which tells us two things. First, it tells us that Boaz is older and not the same age as Ruth, giving further evidence to our conclusion that the book of Ruth takes place during the time of Ehud and not Othniel. Second, it tells us that Ruth is still relatively young. We don't know how young, but we said in earlier lessons it is quite possible that Ruth is in her late 20s or early 30s by this point. And by calling her daughter instead of foreigner, shows us that Boaz isn't looking at Ruth as a foreigner, but a fellow Israelite. When Ruth comes to him, Boaz tells her that he doesn't want her to glean in another field and to remain near where the reapers were. Why did he say this? Most likely because while Ruth was on his land, he could guarantee her protection, since he had told the men not to touch her, meaning they weren't to attack her and they weren't to engage in any immoral behavior, which they might have done seeing as how she was a foreigner. Instead, Ruth was to stay close by his young maidens. It is likely that these women were involved in tying up the sheaves that were reaped, and so by Ruth positioning herself here, she could gather anything that was missed earlier. Moreover, when Ruth was thirsty, she could go to vessels and drink from what the young men had drawn to drink. This was an exceptionally high privilege given to Ruth, for she was being treated as one of the male reapers and not as a gleaner, especially a female gleaner. Ruth was obviously humbled by this treatment, and so she bowed down to the ground before Boaz and wondered why she had found favor in his eyes, seeing as how she was a foreigner. Boaz told Ruth that it was because of her character. It had been reported to Boaz all that she had done for her mother-in-law Naomi, and how she had left her land to come to a land and a people whom she did not know. Therefore, he felt that it was his duty before God that her work be repaid, and that a full reward be given her by God, Jehovah, under whose wings Ruth had come for refuge. In all of this, we see the outstanding character of Boaz. First of all, Boaz is a believer in God and a believer in God's providence and God's blessings. He knows that the Lord helps his servants, and by Ruth's faith, Boaz had determined that the Lord was blessing Ruth. Second, Boaz shows his obedience to the law of Moses. In Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 19 to 22, the Lord commanded through Moses, saying, "When you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. The Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat your olive trees, you shall not go over the boughs again. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not glean it afterward. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore, I command you to do this thing." Boaz took this command to heart and followed it. But there is a third thing about the character of Boaz that we learn from this, which is that his mother and father taught him well. Later on in this book, we're going to learn that Boaz's mother was Rahab, the same Rahab that we met in Joshua 2. Rahab was a harlot and a Canaanite who was only saved through her faith in God and how she treated the spies sent to spy out Jericho. With his mother being a foreigner to Israel, but saved through faith, Boaz had a unique experience that led him to treat foreigners, especially faithful foreigners, differently than maybe others in Israel would have. After showing her this kindness, Ruth's only desire was that she continue to find favor in the eyes of Boaz. We'll conclude chapter 2, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Ruth chapter 2, verses 14 to 23, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.